The following program may not be suitable for all audiences and has been rated C for creepy and chilling. The views and opinions of the Darkest Hours hosts and creators do not necessarily reflect those of Neo Retro FM or its affiliates. Neo Retro FM does not assume responsibility for the Darkest Hours content or its residual effects on listeners, including nightmares, disturbed rest or unsettling images planted in your head. The time to change the station or leave has now come and gone. And now, we present The Darkest Tower, with your host Amanda Jane, here on Neo Retro FM.
There's hope for tomorrow. We embark on the darkest hour.
Hello, and good evening all. Welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight's stories take us through the different arenas of fear. Whether it be ghosts, intruders, or the unexplained, everyone is afraid of something. So, we explore them all here on The Darkest Hour. Growing up, we lived in an older house, built in 1860, in a little farm town just outside of the city. This was from the time I was 3 till I was 21. Strange things would happen all the time, so much so that we even had a nickname for the ghost that we believed lived there. We called her Maud. This specific event happened when I was 4, so it's more my family's story than my own. The story goes that it had just been my grandpa's 60th birthday. He lived with us as well. We had had helium balloons tied to a chair in the kitchen. And the house is basically one long hallway, from the front door straight back to the kitchen, with the living room kind of divided by the hallway and the bottom of the stairs, which were visible from the couch. My sister says that she got up to grab a drink from the kitchen, and a few minutes later was sitting back on the couch with my uncle, when all of a sudden, the once tied to the chair helium balloons started to float away at a very low height, right past them and toward the stairs. The balloons turned and made their way up the stairs. My sister said that she was so scared, she and my uncle just sat there, shocked at what they'd just seen. Suddenly, they heard the balloons pop. After a few minutes of mustering up the courage to go upstairs, they decided to go collect the balloon pieces. They were curious, but mainly we had cats and they didn't want them to eat the pieces. But to their surprise, there were no balloons or pieces upstairs. They searched all the bedrooms with no luck, so they started searching a little bit harder. Behind shower curtains, in closets behind doors. And as they searched my brother's bedroom at the top of the stairs just one last time, they opened the closet door, and to their horror, there were the balloons, floating perfectly in the closet, not popped. There were many more stories, and some equally as creepy, but that one always stood out in my mind. And I understand why my parents waited until I was much older to tell me that one. Across from the staff office was a doorway that led to the living room and the rest of the house. The facility was a converted mid-century post-war building. an old dentist office more recently, with a small addition on the side. Since we were a 24-hour facility, one staff member worked the overnight shift from midnight to 8 a.m., and then was relieved by the incoming staff. I had started there as a part-time counselor and used to work that shift before working my way up to supervisor. Overall, there were about 6 counselors that regularly worked overnights. Collectively, we all had very similar experiences. We would hear footsteps upstairs in the therapist office around 2 a.m., which was above the living room. When I first started there, it used to freak me out to hear that, and I would regularly turn on all the lights in the house during my shift. Twice I saw an outline of a man in the back hallway, just standing there silently, motionless. A few other counselors saw him over the years, including the previous supervisor. Every once in a while, we would get a kid that would tell us that they saw a man in the hallway, while we, the staff, were performing overnight duties like dishes or cleaning in other parts of the house. What we didn't tell the kids, for fear of really scaring them, was that prior to our facility opening in the late 90s, well, as I said, it was a dentist office, and the office was going through some financial troubles. The dentist unfortunately committed suicide. From what my boss, the director, told me, he hung himself from a tree in the woods outside of his home. While he didn't commit suicide at our facility, we believe that he is the man that we would see in the back of the hallway and was responsible for the footsteps that were upstairs, as that was, you bet, his old personal office. One time, when I first started there, one of our overnight workers had an emergency. I was working the 4 to 12 shift, so I said that I could stay until 3 a.m. until another staff member relieved me. At that time, I didn't have a car, so my mom came to pick me up at 3 a.m. The staff parking lot was in the back of the house off the patio. My mom got there a bit early, so she just waited in the car for me to finish my notes. When I got out to the car, she said, "I didn't know you had bedrooms upstairs." She pointed to the window that was the therapist's office on the second floor. I replied, "There aren't." "Well, who's upstairs?" she said. "No one," I replied. "Everyone's asleep and Sean's in the living room." She claimed she saw someone part the curtain and stare at her for a few minutes. She said it was weird, but she assumed that it was just a curious kid who couldn't sleep. She was adamant that they eventually closed the part in the curtain, disappeared from the window shortly before I came outside. Growing up, my parents and I moved around a lot. My dad being in the army, and, well, so it goes. I actually didn't mind it at all. Being young, my mom being my best friend, getting to explore new spaces and places together. It was actually a pretty great childhood. There was, however, one particular room in one particular home that was not so great. So let's go back to when I was 7 or 8 years old, living in Virginia Beach in military housing near the base. I was exploring, going to every room, picking which one I would use for sleeping and claiming rooms for arbitrary use, like, "This will be Kitten's room." Kitten was my cat, who was not a kitten anymore, but that's what happens when you let a 5-year-old name their new kitten. As I made my way to the upstairs, I had to pass the bathroom. And when I did, I got a horrible feeling. Like someone was right around the corner or watching me from inside. Instantly, I ran down the stairs and I told my mom that I thought someone was up there. She gave me a smile and then made a play-serious face, rolled up her sleeves, gave me a wink, and walked up the stairs. I think she was just entertaining my fear like a parent does when they look under the bed for a monster. She made some noises like she was looking around, turned on the light, and walked back out from the top of the stairs yelling, "The coast is clear, no intruders here," and ran down the stairs. Basically, she made very light of it all, and I guess that it was silly if nothing was up there, so I didn't continue to talk about it. Still, I felt very wary of that bathroom, and aside from having to pass it every day to get up and down the stairs, I avoided it at all costs. There were 2 others, so it wasn't impossible. But one night, I woke up pretty frantically in the middle of the night, whipping my upper body up and looking around the room, feeling very scared. I was sweating, and it felt like my bed was soaking wet near my feet, like they were underwater. I lifted up my sheets, and the sensation was gone. My sheets were dry. I still felt scared, and I didn't know why I was awake. And then I heard something. It sounded like someone was in the hallway or in the bathroom. Hoping it was my mom, I looked out my bedroom door and down the hallway. I saw the bathroom door was closed and the light was on. I walked over to the bathroom and called out through the door, "Mom, can I sleep in your room?" I waited for her reply, but there was none. Just as I went to open the door, the light turned off. I reached to turn the light back on, but nothing happened. I walked in, expecting to see my mom, but instead, I saw what looked like a girl in the bathtub sleeping. No, she wasn't sleeping. She wasn't moving. She was covered in dark water on the floor and spread on the walls. Even in my tiny brain, I registered that this was blood, and instantly I closed my eyes, screamed at the top of my lungs, and made a mad dash for my mom's bedroom door. When I got there, she met me at the door, already awake and on her way. "What's going on? What happened?" And through the tears, I tried to explain what I had just seen. Finally, I looked at her, begging her to please go to the bathroom or call someone to go in there. "The girl," I told her. "Look at the girl." And my mom looked at me, not smiling, and instead looked a little worried. She tells me to go to her bed, and as I watch her walk towards the bathroom, I can see that the light is on. She walks in, and just as quickly walks out. She looks at me and tells me there's nothing in there. She told me to follow her, that I could sleep in her room, but I didn't really sleep that night. After that, I tried to push it out of my mind. I didn't use the bathroom, but didn't make a fuss. One time, my mom asked me to grab some towels for her from the bathroom. I did it, very quickly, but I did it. Without incident. It never felt right in there. All the way up until we moved, I hated that space. My mom actually brought this story up in the last year. She started getting a little into sci-fi stuff, and she gave me credit for my fears, even admitting that she didn't not believe me. And she didn't believe that I was just having nightmares. But she also truly couldn't see what I saw. She too was happy when we moved. We've never had an experience quite like that at all. Not before and not since. So this was nearly 20 years ago. Over a few months' period of time, there were all these posters of missing women that kept going up around the neighborhood that I lived in and the neighborhoods nearby. One night, I was sitting in a bar with a group of friends. There were probably about 20 people there total. Everyone's having a nice time, no drama, nothing out of the ordinary. When this guy walks in and sits down, he was wearing regular clothes, not noteworthy. He didn't talk or say anything strange. He wasn't even really acting in a weird way. But the whole room went cold. People stopped talking and started shuffling around in their seats. It was like this unexpected dark energy had consumed the room. I remember feeling breathless and like I just wanted to run. Everyone else in the bar seemed to be responding in the same way. The guy walked over to the bar and asked for a drink, and I've never seen this happen to a sober customer before, or one who hasn't caused any trouble, but the barman turned him away. After that, the guy left. Almost immediately, the atmosphere went back to where it had been. I walked up to the bar, ordered a drink, and asked the bartender why he'd refused that guy a drink. He said that the guy just made him feel uncomfortable in a way that he'd never experienced before, and he couldn't bring himself to serve him a drink. Other people in the bar began to agree, but no one could put their finger on why. A couple of weeks later, I was watching the news, and there was a breaking story about how someone had found dismembered limbs in a bag. The remains belonged to the missing women whose photos had been around town for months. They showed a photograph of the serial killer that they'd caught, and holy shit, if it wasn't the same guy in the bar that night, who no one could bear to be in the same room with. I can't explain why, because when he walked in and asked for a drink, he really didn't do anything strange. But he brought this terrifying, unrecognizable energy with him. Sometimes I wonder if he had just killed someone, or killed someone an hour later or something, and that's why the presence of evil was so visceral that night. My strange story took place in September 2009. My church was on a retreat in Indiana, in the forest. The place we stayed at was a small building in the center of the forest. We decided that evening to go out and play a game with the kids. The game we decided on was called Police, or something along those lines. It's where the kids were the police and pick an adult to be the hostage, and everyone tries to find the hostage who's picked a hiding spot to begin with and can't move the entire game. At nightfall, we all grabbed our flashlights and the game began. We split into 2 large groups and started our search for the hostage hiding somewhere in the dark. We start going around the back of the building, and we spotted a tall figure, and it was running toward the trees. There was a small opening in the tall grass that was up to your knees. It was running with its arms at its sides, but it stopped at the edge of the tall grass, as if to wait for us to get closer. We chased after it, thinking it was the adult and that we'd won. When we were finally a few yards away, it dove into the grass and started to crawl very fast, almost snake-like. We got really weirded out, but stood there staring at it. When it got across the tall grass, it began to climb a tree. I could see that it looked somewhat like a deformed cat-like animal. Then, a few moments later, a kid yelled, "I see him," and was pointing in the opposite direction. We saw a similar figure running a couple of yards away, so we started to chase it. But then, it vanished behind a tree. A few minutes later, we found the adult hiding in the parking lot in front of the building the whole time. They swore they never ran from us, that they had been there the whole time. So, who knows what we saw that night in the forest? But I know that at least 15 kids saw it with me, and I know I'm not crazy.
You are listening to The Darkest Hour, only on
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com.
We'll be right back.
I wanted to take a moment to talk about something my husband Ryan and I and our band Forget Me Not are doing this summer. We're teaming up with the Foundation for Edmond School District and their Nourishing Network program to support students and families in need. We kickstarted our campaign by releasing our latest single, Sweetest Thing. All summer long, we'll be donating 100% of music-generated proceeds to the foundation. You can help just by listening to our music. So, for all the details, be sure to follow us and visit our website, conductedbyforgetmenot.com. If you wish to donate or get involved with the foundation, please visit foundationesd.org. Help make No Student Hungry a reality.
And now, we continue with our stories.
Several years ago, I joined a book club. And at our first meeting, I noticed that you could buy other curious and cool things besides books. I saw a crystal ball and I really wanted one, so I ordered it. When the crystal ball arrived, there was a little booklet telling you how to use it. It said to get comfortable and you could use it day or night. I chose nighttime. You are to wash it in rose water or vinegar and sit it on a silk black cloth, which I did. It was also saying not to let it roll around. It came with a little wooden circle to place it on. I also used candles for lighting and incense for relaxation. At first, I saw a mist. I tried to write down all that I was seeing, but what I wrote down would disappear when I gazed into the ball again. I saw different colors after a while, and then I saw my two kids. They looked far away and were sitting down. My son had his face on a table for some reason. It says not to drop the ball. I was trying to get a better look into the ball next to the candlelight, and I dropped it. I grabbed it looking for any kind of cracks, and it didn't break. I could see through it perfectly in the candlelight. Then slowly, an eye started to form. It was now a perfect eye. It moved left and right and blinked. The eyeball really freaked me out, so I put it away and I never tried to use it again. It was a few years later that I ran across it while moving. It was neatly packed in its original box with the little book telling you how to use it. My bookmarker was still there where I'd left off. I had never read the whole thing as I was in a hurry and just wanted to try and use it. For the heck of it, I continued reading. It said, "You'll know you're on the right track when you see your crystal ball awaken. You'll see an eye slowly begin to open." That's exactly what happened. We lived behind a graveyard at the time, and I often wonder if I opened a door to the other side without realizing what I was doing. Because I've had happenings ever since. I've heard that once you open that door, you can never close it. A few nights ago, after a long day of very necessary chores was coming to a close, I found myself dutifully putting away a load of laundered clothes. I was in our bedroom when I heard noise on the baby monitor, just a few feet from where I was standing. That's strange, I thought. I knew my husband and son were both in the living room, quietly watching TV. My 2-year-old had drifted silently off to sleep, curled in my husband's lap as he caught the evening news. Our bedroom door was straight in front of me, and I could see down the hall to the large recliner where they were sitting. And the noise over the monitor continued. It didn't take too long for me to realize that these sounds were very familiar. Earlier that day, I was in my son's bedroom, putting a load of folded clothes into the drawers, picking up stray toys and books that weren't being played with. all while telling my son the fairy tale or story of Rumpelstiltskin for the first time. Now, hours later, I stood in disbelief as I heard the drawers being pulled open and shut and the rustling of toys and books being put into the proper places. But I nearly fainted when I heard my son's voice over the monitor. I kept looking back and forth at my husband, now sleeping son, in the chair, and then back to the monitor, sitting on the dresser. It was literally replaying specific events from earlier in the day. The monitor is a standard baby monitor, bought from Walmart. It's not a recorder. Instead, it monitors sound coming from the room as they're happening at the time. I listened as my own voice retold the story of Rumpelstiltskin and listened with familiarity as my son responded with the few words that he knew to the tale that he'd never heard before. The incredible part was this all happened just 5 hours earlier on the same day. I quickly called my husband into the room. He moved our boy to the couch and met me there, and he listened to the last part of the story, with my voice coming through the monitor and our son's coos and chuckles. He stood, stunned, turned his head, looked at our sleeping son, flopped peacefully on the couch. In disbelief, he asked, "How in the hell?" as his voice drifted off, trying not to miss a thing. I just stared at him in the same disbelief, and we both just shook our heads. This has never happened before or since. We were listening to some sort of warp in time. I never imagined that I would witness something like this or believe it. But if it should happen to you, it is indeed one of the most incredible moments one can ever experience. My story is something that's hard to believe, but it's mine and it's true. This is something that I saw one very cold, dry November night. My family and I moved into a new house upon a hill on a little back road in a very small town, Fort Gay, West Virginia. Fort Gay sits right on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town then was probably just a couple thousand. My family and I were unpacking. We had not yet put the furniture in its rightful place, and everything was still in boxes. Overwhelmed with working all day, I retired around 11. I put my little brother on the couch and I took his bed, since my bed wasn't put together yet. His room faces the front of the house. His window is around 20-25 feet off the ground. I was looking out the window when I saw it. It was about 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen. I really had never been so scared in my life. All I could do was lay there and just stare at the thing. It was sitting in a tree, about 50 feet or so off the ground, about 50 feet from the house, across the yard. It had big, red, bright, glowing eyes. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and put my head under the covers when all of a sudden this thing smacked the window. I went through the house screaming, "There's something outside!" And by the time I reached my parents, I was crying. They looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you? It looks like you've seen a ghost." My face was apparently snow white. "I don't know what it was, but please, Dad, don't go outside." I pleaded and pleaded, but he grabbed his gun and he walked out the front door. Moments later, he came back in and said there was nothing out there. I kept screaming, saying, "Yes, there is. There's definitely something out there." When I explained to them what I saw, how I felt, they said I was being a little crazy. But to this day, I will not go outside by myself. And even in the day, someone still has to walk me to my car. I have heard of some pretty crazy things going on up the road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. Years later, my husband and I went to the theaters and watched Mothman Prophecies. I was reliving that night all over again. The way they described feeling, what they saw, was remarkable. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I saw. I believe in my heart of hearts, I saw the Mothman. I only live about 80 miles south of Point Pleasant, where all of that took place 40 years ago. It was exactly 32 years to the month when I saw it. I met my husband in 1985 in New York City. Shortly after that, we were married in Ludlow, England, which is where my husband lived at the time and most of his family continues to live. It's also where this story takes place. This was back in 1994. We were living in New York at the time, and I remember we were walking home from lunch when my husband received the unfortunate call that his grandmother, or Granny Margaret, had suffered a stroke and passed away. She was 81 years old. Granny Margaret was a wonderful woman, and in her own words, lived a most blessed life. Never complained, this lady. Cute as a button, contagious laugh. She also knew everyone. She had spent the last 25 years working just a few miles from her home, where she taught primary school, and was a beekeeper at the farm next to the school. Just one of those grannies that everybody loved, one of those people that everyone loved. The plane ride was rather sad, knowing that we weren't going there to see her, but rather going to say goodbye. And honestly, like most funerals, it was somber but bittersweet. I will say, it was rather nice to see so many people come out and pay their respects. And there were quite a few lighthearted and heartwarming stories shared throughout the service by her friends, and it was endearing for sure. As the service ended and most individuals made their way back to their cars, the majority of the family had decided to take a short walk to Granny's home. The walk home was nice, lots of smiles and laughs over some of the great stories that were told. Remembering Granny was a beautiful thing. And as we approached her home, we couldn't believe the amazing sight on the corner, just opposite the home that Margaret had lived in for over 25 years. Hundreds of bees settled into a cluster on the wall. The bees stayed for more than an hour before they started buzzing off over the rooftops of the homes until they were no longer visible. The sight of so many honeybees in such an unusual spot drew the attention of the local paper, and they actually ran a photograph of this wall cluster of bees. Could be a coincidence, but we all like to think that those were her bees, saying goodbye, paying their respects to their caretaker, Granny Margaret. For Memorial Day weekend, my entire family usually goes camping. This year, the trip was great per usual, but what happened on the way home was very unusual. We live in Salem, Oregon, so we're driving northbound from Prospect to get home. It was a long drive, late and dark. My mom had fallen asleep, but my sister and I were still awake, just talking and bugging our dad every once in a while. We were less than 20 minutes from our house, driving along State Street, when my sister and I both say, "Whoa," at the same time. We look at each other and then right back out the window to the sky. Something was hovering in the sky, just below the clouds, and perpendicular to our moving car. We asked our dad if he saw this thing, and he nudged our mom, gently shaking her awake, as he tells us, yes, he sure does see it. Now, all four of us awake, looking up into the sky at this thing. It was glowing with this bright green almost white light. It stayed visible for all of 2 minutes, continuing to move or hover perpendicular to our car before quickly disappearing underneath the clouds. It was so beautiful and scary all at the same time. My family looked it up online to see if there was anything in the local paper or news, but we didn't find anything. My sister did find a report on some UFO website, someone actually describing something similar around the same time. So, we weren't just seeing things after all. What we saw, we have no clue. This happened while I was visiting my aunt and uncle. I was helping take care of their little boys, 6 and 3, as my aunt had just had a baby. They live in a super nice, big subdivision type place that sits on a lake. They've got 6-foot fences and alarms that surround the area, so that if anybody were to open an external gate or door, a terrible alarm would sound. They also have 3 very large, very loud dogs. So, the story. It's late one night, kids are asleep, aunt and uncle are asleep. I'm up, hanging in the living room on their big comfy chair, with my back to the large windows behind me, floor to ceiling type. I hear a noise, and then I hear it again. I can tell the noise is coming from outside, and I hear all 3 dogs going off at something. Then I hear somebody, or something, tapping on the large window behind me. Now, there are a lot of bugs out there, and even at night, you can hear them buzzing around and even hitting the windows time to time. So at first, I'm assuming that it's one of those nasty, large hornets that are always around. I'm also keeping in mind that this is a neighborhood that you can't get into without a code or key card. I wasn't incredibly worried, yet. I slowly turn to look over my left shoulder at the window, and I see a face, a woman, and her position, I remember it vividly. Crouched down so that her head was level with my chair. She was pale, her hair was dirty blonde, she wasn't young but wasn't old. So I sort of start to panic. I'm currently staying in a really nice area that I wouldn't expect this to happen in. My mind is racing. I was confused how she got into their yard. Even if she lived in the development, why would there be a very pale woman in the backyard? When I say pale, I mean so pale that she was almost glowing. Why no alarm? Where were the dogs now? I sprint down the hallway, definitely scared at this point. And once I get to the office with the security cameras, I look at the screens. Nothing there. What the heck, I thought. So I walked back out and headed over to the window, where I can clearly see that there are wet footprints leading up to the window. Instead of waking my aunt and uncle, I waited until the morning. When my uncle checked the security footage, he said that it didn't look like the cameras were recording. That usually they'll start recording if an alarm is tripped, or someone or something is within a certain distance of the house. So, I didn't get to see the woman standing at the window, or the footsteps, but I'm sure there was a visitor that night. I just have no idea if it was a person or an entity. I'm a magician from Vancouver, Washington, and I collect haunted objects. Recently, I acquired a mysterious box from a local couple. The couple, Paul and Rhonda, got the box after Paul's father died. It had been in his father's possession since Paul was a small boy, but they weren't sure where his father had gotten it from originally. The box appeared to be a silver-plated cigar or trinket box, and depicts a scene of Dutch people dancing. After looking at the watermark, it appeared to be made by Barber Silver Company, and even had a serial number. After doing a little research, I found that it was made by the company at the turn of the last century. The couple explained that when they brought it into their home, strange things started happening. Their cat started to get very aggressive, hissing and even swatting at people when it was in the same room with the box. There were also other strange things, like the light in the room turning on and off rapidly in the middle of the night, hearing clear footsteps and voices whispering. They really didn't want the box and had asked if I would take it. They reported back that once it was removed from their home, all the noises and other things had stopped. So it's an interesting box that apparently irritates cats. I've kept the box in a room with my other haunted objects, and since my cats don't go in there, I'm not sure what their reaction will be if I decide to introduce them to it. Though I haven't experienced anything like voices, I will say that after holding it for a while, I really don't like the feeling of having it in my hands. I plan to test the box by putting it in a room without the other haunted objects sometime soon. I'll be sure to let you know how that goes. This isn't really a ghost story, but it is a scary one. I traveled quite a bit for work, and this was an experience on a flight from Phoenix to Atlanta about 1.5 years ago. The flight had been relatively uneventful. Some turbulence is a bit normal, and with an active storm, it seemed warranted. However, as we got closer to our destination, the storm definitely picked up, and we ended up circling Atlanta for quite some time. We couldn't get to the airport or Atlanta itself because it was nothing but severe thunderstorms. So, we went round and round for over an hour. This was after a 4-hour flight from Phoenix. Eventually, the pilot comes over the speaker saying, "Folks, we're out of fuel, so we're going to make our landing now." And so, we started the descent, and it went pitch black. It was dead silent in the cabin. As we sat in silence, all you could hear were several alarms sounding from within the cockpit, and the engines over-revving like they were going to explode. It was terrifying. We would drop suddenly every few seconds, just straight down, free fall. If this was a roller coaster, it was one of those horrible, jerky ones. At one point, one of the cabins flew open and a piece of luggage was sent flying. This went on for so long. Every few seconds, a heavy gasp from the passengers would echo through the cabin. A few faint cries, but in all, we stayed quiet. The pilot came back on and said that we were going to touch down, to brace ourselves for possible impact. Making our way down, it felt like we were just dropped 50 feet, instead of the usual glide to the runway. And the actual landing was super rough. More of the upper cabins flew open, luggage once again flying out, actually hitting some people. Looking out the window, you could see sparks flying from the wheels, the tires screaming on the wet pavement. Finally, we came to a complete stop and just sat there for, an eternity, until we slowly started taxiing around the terminal. You could see the reflection of the plane through the airport windows. We definitely had some sort of impact when we hit the ground or something. As we exited the plane, the pilots came out and greeted people as they usually do. They were inundated with thank yous, and a couple of women hugged them over and over. Most men shook their hands. I certainly did. When I shook their hands, I could feel that they were soaking wet from sweat. I think that's what affected me the most. This wasn't routine for them, and they were probably just as scared as the rest of us. I had this experience in the winter of 2011. I just relocated from Portland back to my hometown in rural Oregon. My house was built by my maternal grandparents in the 1960s. After they were both gone, my mom didn't have the heart to sell or lease the house. So here I am. The property sits just off of a highway, not a busy one, and it's on a slope. There are several stairs leading to the front door from the carport, which sits underneath our dining room. My grandfather was a veterinarian. He also had a horse, so there's a large barn down the slope, about 20 or 30 steps from the house. At any rate, you can see the barn clearly from the house. Not terribly relevant, but it gives you a bit of a visual. It was a Friday or Saturday night, as I was up late around 11 midnight. The night was foggy, and it was seasonably cold outside. I stepped out the front door to have a smoke. No judging, I know it's bad. I sat on the front steps, and as I looked forward, I could see 3 or 4 hooded figures wearing white, standing just to the left of the barn down the slope. What the hell? I thought. Maybe it was an animal or animals, or I was tired, maybe seeing things. As I stared for a minute, I saw them move around, like they were working on something as a group. I rubbed my eyes and could still see them. Though foggy, these were human forms. I should also say that it was dead quiet outside. Not a peep from an animal, no traffic, nor were the figures themselves seeming to make any noise with whatever work they appeared to be doing. Oddly enough, at first I wasn't afraid of these trespassers. I was almost certain these were ghostly figures I was seeing. So I stepped down a couple of stairs to get a better look. Still blurry, I thought, but definitely a group of human-sized beings wearing white. They didn't appear to notice me. This lasted almost the whole length of my smoke, about 5 minutes, until I started thinking, what if these hooded figures were some sort of KKK garbage cult or something? I mean, it was literally not unheard of. A lot of Confederates migrated to this area following the Civil War. And as weird as it sounds, their children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren still sound like they're from the South with thick accents. Was it possible this was a residual something or other? Was it possible this was a ritual of sorts? I decided to go inside, grab my phone, my boyfriend, and a flashlight to shine down there. I told my boyfriend about the figures. He was watching TV, and he's usually easily creeped out, as he can't even watch The Shining without making a fuss, but he pretty much said, "Seriously? Creepy," and went back to the TV. I stood in front of him, said I was dead serious, to look out the window and come with me. I reached in my purse to grab my phone and the flashlight that was on the counter. By the time I was back outside, less than a minute, they had all vanished. I shined the light down to see if there was anything, people, animals, running about, but there was nothing. I still have no explanation, but either way, it was rather chilling. This happened in the summer of 2007, around dusk, on Broadkill Road in Broadkill Beach, Delaware. This road borders a swamp area, and standing on the side of the road by the swamp, my daughter and I saw a creature like we've never seen before. It stood about 2.5, 3 feet tall, with long legs, a tan body, a flat, almost puggish face, and a long tail. It had small ears and looked like it couldn't be more than 30 pounds. My other daughter and her friend also saw this same animal the year before, around the same area, except it was at night and ran in front of their car. I asked the lady who owned the Broadkill Beach store about it, and she said that she'd seen it once before, when she was dirt biking with her dad in that same area years ago. And both her and her dad had no idea what it was. She said we were lucky to have spotted it, as very few people have seen it. We went to the Prime Hook Reserve Museum. Prime Hook Reserve is the swampy area. And they had no idea what it could be. I'm just wondering if anyone else has seen it and what the heck it is. So I've had two experiences in my life that I consider to be unexplained. Both happened when I was alone, but each in a different location. The first was when I was visiting home from college. Usually I sleep in the living room by myself, falling asleep to the TV. This night, it was late, probably midnight, and that's exactly what I was doing. I had just finished painting my nails, so I was sitting really still to let them dry as I watched TV. On the other end of the very big living room table, there was a lotion bottle, and suddenly it tipped over by itself. I'm the only one in the living room at this point, and there was no form of shaking that happened. It really freaked me out, but this was my parents' house, and normally there's nothing to be afraid of, so I eventually brushed it off. The second event was last year, in my first apartment. They had one of those bathrooms that wasn't inside the unit, instead across the hallway and shared with one other resident. It sounds weird, but the bathroom was one of those fancy-looking ones, and it had 2 sinks with a marble table space between them, 2 large mirrors on each side that filled the wall. Well, I was by myself doing my skincare routine. The door was closed and locked. I placed a small amount of facial oil on my hands, and I set the glass bottle on the empty table space. Since I'd already taken my contacts out, I stood up and walked to the full-length side of the mirror so that I could sort of see what I was doing. I started to apply the oil to my face, and at this time, my back was facing the glass bottle. I'm not near it. A few moments later, I heard a glass-like object fall off the table. I turned around, and sure enough, my glass bottle had been tipped over. I didn't even grab it. Instead, I just left, got into my apartment, and just sort of freaked out for the rest of the night. When my friend was over the next day, I told her about it, and she offered logical explanations like, it was probably from someone's music being too loud, or something else causing the walls to shake or the floor. Except there was no music. There was no shaking. There was no external physical force that could have explained it. Either of these events, which is why I consider them unexplained. A coworker of mine told me that she thinks that it could be a spirit trying to contact me. That knocking over small things is a form of trying to get my attention. I don't know about all of that, but it's been a year and nothing of the sort has happened since. So, black-eyed children, black-eyed kids. The mere idea of them terrifies me. It didn't used to. In fact, I didn't understand what the big deal was. I would read the stories online and articles, just like everybody else, but I didn't have that immediately terrified or uncomfortable feeling that so many other people did after reading about them. Instead, I was pretty interested in debunking them. I'd show people just how unscary these things were. Straight out of a Hollywood studio, I thought. I mean, even still, I'm the kind of person who needs to see it to believe it. So, I began doing a lot of research online. I looked at the paranormal sites. I watched scary videos on YouTube. And from everything I gathered, they found you. You didn't find them. And it seemed like it was pretty much just by chance if they did find you. So, I came up with a plan. I began putting up an anonymous ad on Craigslist. It read, "Black-eyed children, I'm not afraid of you. I just want to meet you. 9 p.m., Wednesday. The park bench on the corner of 3rd in Washington. Show me why I should be afraid of you." The bench was a couple of blocks from my apartment, so every Wednesday I'd just walk down there and see if anyone or anything came by. I wouldn't sit there, I'd stand back and watch. I'm not stupid. I may not be afraid of black-eyed children, but I know the internet can attract some real nuts. And it did. Nothing exciting enough to write about, though. But that night, I got a knock on my door. I was sitting on my couch, and it was a little after 9 p.m. I don't know how to explain it, but the second I heard that knock, my skin went cold. I didn't need to get up. I knew who it was. And much to my surprise, I was terrified already. I had been wrong about not being afraid of black-eyed children. This fear is on a different level, an instinctual, primal level. But still, I managed to get up and open the door. There was a kid, about 9 years old, olive skin, dark hair, solid black eyes, staring up at me. "Can I come in?" he said. I was speechless. After what seemed like an eternity, I responded with a no, and I began closing the door. "We missed you at the park tonight," the boy said. I stopped closing the door. I looked at him, my mind racing. They've been watching me. The boy smiled up at me. It took everything I had to make my arm move again, pushing the door closed and locking it. As soon as I shut the door, I gasped for air. I hadn't been breathing. I sat against my wall, facing the closed door. He was still there. I waited. Nothing. It took me at least an hour to move from that one spot, staring at the door. I didn't sleep that night or the next night. I mean, not really. Eventually, I did collapse from exhaustion at my desk at work. I was awoken a few moments later by a nightmare memory of the boy. It's been about 7 months. I can't explain the fear that washes over your body when you see the eyes on these kids. And the state of your mind, the way your body wants to listen to what they're telling you, what they're asking from you. I thought if I told you my story, it would help me get over what happened and warn others. I'm positive that these children are evil, and the people that they meet who can't resist whatever power they have, I don't think we will ever hear from those people. I find myself avoiding the corner park bench with everything I have. I don't really tell anyone why. People think I'm crazy sometimes, walking 3 blocks out of my way just to make sure I don't go near it. But you'd be the same way if you went through what I did. Black-eyed children are nothing to mess with. And so, it's the end of the hour, everyone. And this officially concludes our 4th episode of The Darkest Hour. A big thank you to everyone for continuing to share your Friday evenings here with me. Be sure to tune in Saturdays for the encore at 11 p.m. only on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I would love to share them. Email me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com. Stay spooky.